Hello, it's Scott Manley here. Well, looking at Spacebase DF9, the original prototype. Now, I'm sure you can guess the reason for this, but if you don't know, Spacebase DF9 was an early access game. It still is an early access game. And it has been developed for about a year since they originally opened up early access. And in the last month, they basically said, yeah, we're going to stop developing this. The next version is going to be version 1.0. We'll fix all the bugs, and then we'll release all the internal Lua scripting so you can muck around with it a little more. The developers have essentially said, we're going from Alpha 6 to production version 1, and that seems to have annoyed a lot of people because the list of things they had been promised is going to be not what they actually get in the end. Now, this is quite a complicated situation, which is why I've been asked to weigh in on it, I guess because I'm also a fan of space games, and I don't know, I have my reasons, but I think it's worth talking about game development in general. So, this prototype came from Amnesia Fortnite, which is Double Fine's internal game jam. They do this every year. They drop everything they're doing for a couple of weeks, and then they all try to create really cool and interesting and quirky titles that could perhaps be turned into real projects. This was one where they decided to try and turn it into a real project. Now, to do that, they had to develop the game, the art assets, and everything else. And, that means assigning a team of programmers and artists to work on this. And these people need to get paid, they need office space, so you need a budget. So, Double Fine doesn't have deep pockets, and they approached Indie Fund. Indie Fund is basically a kind of like venture capital for indie games. They want to promote cool and interesting games, so they will give indie developers, $50,000 to $100,000 to make their game, and once it's released, they will then take the initial profits from the game. They'll take until they've covered their initial investment, and then after that, they'll take only 25% until they've either doubled their original investment or 2 years expires. It's entirely possible that after the initial cash gets put up, the game doesn't sell enough copies and Indie Fund loses money, but ideal situation, they get twice as much money back. Now, this was a bit bigger than they would normally go for. Apparently they wanted $400,000, so Tim Schafer had to call up a bunch of friends in various lines in the business, let's say. He had to burn some of his political capital in the indie games business, let's say, to get some investment from a bunch of people like Morgan Webb and companies like Humble Bundle. They put together this $400,000 package, and then they set a few programmers and artists on it to get the thing out of the door. And so, in October last year, they released this on Steam Early Access. Now, the Steam Early Access was still in its early days. Of course, Steam Early Access had launched with Kerbal Space Program as one of its early access titles, so I was inclined to agree that it was perhaps a good way to do things. Now, Double Fine, I knew they were a good developer and they had a strong history of making really interesting products, so I was not afraid at all to back this. They had a very long list of features they said they were going to add, and so yeah, I bought it, paid my $25, played it, and made some videos about it, and maybe some people bought it because of my videos, and that makes me feel kind of guilty. But the game apparently sold exceptionally well, and they managed to make back their $400,000 base investment in 2 weeks. So Indie Fund got its money back almost right away, and that's $400,000 after the cut that Steam takes, so it's more than that. Now, presumably the publishers, the developers, they didn't blow all their $400,000 just getting it to the initial state. They presumably left cash over because they wanted to continue development, because of course they didn't know how fast it was going to sell. I'm sure they would have been happy with selling 10,000 copies at the initial price. Anyway, despite this initial surge, apparently the cash flow hasn't continued at nearly the rate they would like. They have been participating in Steam sales, and the money isn't there to continue paying the developers what you need to pay developers. Now, Tim Schafer of Double Fine was quoted recently as saying it costs about $10,000 per month per developer. And a lot of people expressed incredulity that you would be paying someone that amount of money. And, well, Double Fine Games are in San Francisco. San Francisco is the epicenter of the tech industry. Competition for the best developers is extremely cutthroat, and salaries are very, very high. $10,000 a month as a salary is actually on the low end of developer salaries in San Francisco. But not only that $10,000 is also covering things like their office space, their hardware, their medical benefits, all these hidden costs that are actually the true cost of paying for employees. So actually $10,000 a month is pretty cheap for San Francisco labor, or at least tech labor. So, given that, it's very clear how you could burn through $400,000 over 3 people over a year, and then perhaps not have enough to continue for another year. It's very easy to see that they could easily have made $800,000 and spent it all making DF9 with their very small team. Now, interestingly enough, there are 2 other sci-fi Dwarf Fortress likes that have both gone through Kickstarter. There's Maya by Simon Roth, and there's RimWorld, produced by Tyne and Sylvester. Now, both of those have got off the order of $200,000 each. So between them, they got the same amount of cash as Spacebase DF9. Now, they provide an interesting contrast. I mean, these are basically one-man teams, so they don't have all the overheads. They don't live in San Francisco. Tyne Sylvester, he's up in Canada, and Simon Roth is in the UK. But they're also developing the code much faster. By the looks of things, to my, unaided, casual eyes, it seems that they're working much better as developers. To my eyes, RimWorld has come on a lot more quickly than DF9 has. Even before this latest announcement, it seemed that updates were slow to happen and major features took a while to get going, whereas RimWorld just seemed to be adding stuff all the time and adding features through mods and everything. There was a bit of grumbling about this about a month ago, and Tim Schafer actually commented saying, listen, we're not going to abandon this game without warning you. We're committed to this. And yes, they didn't abandon it without warning us. They gave us 1 month notice. Yeah, this is going to be the last version. Maybe there'll be another bug fix version, but really, they pointed out that Double Fine doesn't have the money to continue financing this. They're a small company with small pockets. Indie Fund has got their money. Steam has been making money from it. Us fans, we have spent our $20, $25 and we're going to get a half-completed game. And that really is one of the fundamental perils of early access, that you can't guarantee the future. You can't predict what's going to happen. They might run out of money. It might be they have to do something else. It's entirely possible that a critical developer gets run over by a bus and then nobody knows how the rest of the code works. I mean, I fundamentally understand why this has happened. I understand that they've run out of cash. I understand that they can't continue to back this any longer, but if this was a Kickstarter with a single developer, then I'm pretty sure that single developer wouldn't be able to get out of it as easily, so to speak. Their reputation would be on the line, whereas Double Fine can, they are a company, right? They exist as an entity which has, a bunch of shareholders. They're there to make money, and they can't afford to continue subsidizing projects which may not end up making them cash, especially when I would really like to see Costume Quest 2 at some point. But, understanding the fundamentals of what led to this situation really doesn't make me any happier with it. At the same time, I don't believe that anyone was deliberately evil. Nobody was doing this through malice. They were doing this through poor project management. I mean, everyone wanted DF9 to be a great game in the end. It came out and it was this wonderful little package of these quirky looking characters with You know, their traits hadn't really been filled in to make them work, but they were making snarky comments, and it was really nice. It sounded good. It had this decent soundtrack. They would do all their things, and it was fun to kind of watch them run around, and even more fun to watch them panic when the oxygen ran out and things were catching fire. You know, the game was very alluring, and I have to say that of all the games I've looked at in early access, this is probably way near the bottom of my risk list. You know, I thought that, Double Fine were excellent producers that had a strong track record of creating quirky and interesting games. It wasn't a single developer that had just thrown some half-assed project up on Steam Early Access and was expecting money. You know, this looked well on the way to being a finished product, and they included a roadmap which had all the features we wanted, and unfortunately we're not going to get a lot of those features. And unfortunately, because of the nature of early access on Steam, nobody is getting their money back from this. The people that are the winners here are very clearly Indie Fund and Steam. They've made a bunch of cash. Double Fine's reputation is taking a bit of a beating over this, and all the users who paid money, they're all not getting that back. I mean, I dearly hope that the 1.0 version that they produce is gonna at least have enough room for people to mod up something perhaps and continue the development a little more. There's clearly a little bit of a community there, but it certainly RimWorld is beating it hands over fist in terms of mod development. And then there's the question, does it damage the reputation of early access in general? You know, are people going to be looking at these other titles now with a little more guarded, a little more suspicion? And I think that would be a good thing. Every time I've covered an early access title, I've really wanted to make it clear that, you know, these things may not work ultimately. You know, what we've got isn't a finished product. And while I like to promote these things, and indeed almost all of my channel is early access, you know, Kerbal Space Program, Elite, Star Citizen, The Long Dark, these are all early access titles. I mean, they're not all Steam early access. Clearly, in the case of Elite and Star Citizen, that was a case of throwing money at the developers and then sitting back and waiting for them to do their thing. And I think people are very happy with the way Elite has turned out. People are obviously very happy with Kerbal Space Program, which was pretty much playable from day one and has one of the best communities out there. Even if they stop developing now, modders have made that into something truly epic. And Star Citizen has so much money thrown at it, it's difficult to see how it won't ultimately produce something. The real question is how much of its fan base will ultimately be truly happy with everything. You know, and as a somewhat prominent channel now, I'm getting approached regularly with people wanting me to promote their Kickstarter, promote their early access title, giving me free copies of games. And, you know, I'm pretty pragmatic about this. I'm not going to promote a Kickstarter which doesn't have a working prototype. There's only a couple of cases where I've mentioned it. The Long Dark I mentioned in Deep Space Network entry, and that was a game that I saw and I backed instantly. Star Citizen, just before the lifetime insurance cutoff happened, I did like a video with the website saying, look, if you're really a fan of space games, then you might want to get in while the going is cheap. And, you know, a lot of people did that, and they're quite happy because they've saved money. And another one, the only other one I can think of is The Mandate, which I covered. They had some demos. They had like a ship damage demo and a little text adventure. And so I kind of made up a little thing, you know, showing off these and discussing the game and saying, you know, if this is your thing, throw some money at it. And I'm seeing their blog recently showing how, you know, boarding actions and space battles work at the same time. And I'm still very excited for this game, and I hope that it comes out. But usually if a Kickstarter doesn't have a prototype, then I'm not going to promote it. I might give it a mention on Twitter, but that's about it. On a couple of occasions, I have been sent a demo which is so basic and bare and rubbish that I basically said, don't even run a Kickstarter, guys. Shut this down. Improve your demo, otherwise people will laugh at you. Obviously, I would use slightly more diplomatic language, but yeah, I mean, if you're really doing a Kickstarter for a game, it seems that nowadays, if you're going to be successful, you have to have a prototype out of the gate. Having some concept art is nice, but you got to have some technology to back it up. I mean, perhaps if you are a very well-known developer with an existing track record, you can get away with it. But ultimately, I'm not going to risk my own reputation by recommending something which I don't think is likely to ultimately succeed. And yet, despite all this caution, it would appear that Spacebase DF9 is one of these things which is going to leave a bad taste in our mouth. And once again, I gotta come back to, me covering the game early on. It seemed to me it was going to be successful, and, maybe a bunch of you did buy the game because you saw me playing it, and that makes me feel really bad, and I have to apologize to you all for leading you on with what seemed like a sure bet at the time. Having said that, the game is relatively playable. It does have a bunch of the features that were promised. It doesn't have them all. There's a really good list that somebody posted on Reddit showing you what stuff has made it into the game and what stuff probably isn't making it into the game. There's enough of the game there to make some people happy, but I think that compared to something like RimWorld, it's really not that good. And it really does lead me to question the notion of early access to continue funding game development, because it's not something you can guarantee. You have to have a contingency plan. Now, if you've done a Kickstarter and you have to do early releases to backers, perhaps it makes some sense. I mean, I saw Planetary Annihilation. I think they did early access in the right way. They basically took their existing reward tiers and they just made it available through Steam and said, hey, if you want to buy it, you can pay the $100 fee to get in early. But I think in their case, it was almost entirely bonus points at that point. They had a very successful Kickstarter early on. And I should also point out that a lot of the early access games I play, I buy with my own money. While developers do send me things, I'm much more likely to cover something if I pay for it myself. Although, to be fair, I bought Planetary Annihilation and I still haven't had a chance to play it. But if I'm not prepared to spend the cash on it, then I don't think I would be likely to cover it on the channel in the first place. And really, that is core part of my gaming selection, that I'm not going to present stuff that I wouldn't be prepared to spend money on in the first place. I think it would be dishonest to cover something just because I got a free copy. And the channel does make me a bit of money, and while I've been trying to funnel that into good things like my kids' education, I've also really embraced the notion that if I make any income from this, that I should really kind of put it back into the community. So, when people watch the Star Citizen videos, I'm pretty much using any ad money from that to buy more Star Citizen things, because I think that's the fairest way to do things, because the developers are working hard on these, and if I'm benefiting, then I should be putting it back into what they do. Every week they have the Humble Bundles, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna put money into all of these simply because I know that some of the money goes back to the developers, and it's a good way to just continually feed money back into the indie game ecosystem, which I fundamentally believe in. I really want to support indie developers in any ways I can. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of AAA titles with AAA graphics, AAA sound, and unimaginative gameplay. I'm not that interested in supporting those people because they're doing well on their own, but if somebody has an original idea or a quirky way of presenting something or just energy that I like, then I want to make sure that they are supported in whatever way I can. I mean, I think it's telling that I have 800 Steam games, but I've only had time to play 100 of them. Anyway, ultimately, I hope that something comes out of Spacebase DF9. Perhaps the modders make it more playable, more interesting, fix all the bugs. Maybe it makes a ton of cash suddenly when it gets the 1.0 release. Maybe there were people just waiting for that 1.0 and they've missed out on all this drama. And maybe that means that Double Fine can actually afford to finish up all the features. I doubt it, but maybe that'll happen. I really don't expect it. If you were really looking for a sci-fi management game, RimWorld is where it's at. Maya is also a great alternate. Both those developers are nice people that deserve your money. And I'm sure that when Costume Quest 2 appears, Double Fine will get more money from me, but I think I will be avoiding early access from them for a long time to come. I think that Indie Fund should perhaps consider production cost a little more into their equation. They should really be thinking about bang for their buck when they're giving out cash, and perhaps giving a huge sum of money to a developer in one of the most expensive job markets in the world isn't a good use of Indie Fund's money. There's a bunch of people asking for the game to be removed from Steam's early access, right? Because they think that it's, broken some rule. And strictly speaking, the game hasn't broken any rules. And, furthermore, if you throw away the roadmap, if you come to the game not knowing that there was this roadmap with all these unfulfilled promises, it would actually be a relatively solid game, notwithstanding the bugs in it right now. Although the fact that there's not going to be any future development on it certainly devalues it as a game at this point. And myself, I'll continue to cover the games that I think deserve coverage, and there's really not much more I can do. I have a limited platform, and I think that there are certainly developers out there that deserve a little more attention, and if I can help in any way, that's what I'm going to do. And I probably will be playing Spacebase DF9 when it is actually released, because I want to see what we ultimately end up with. Maybe I still get a few laughs out of the game. Maybe I get my money's worth. I mean, I don't know how many hours I'm going to have to play it to get my money's worth. But I probably already passed that, to be honest. Anyway, I think that's all I've got to say on the subject. So I'll be saying that I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.